Hello, everyone. This is a call. So, what I want to talk about today is I'm going to talk about premature ejaculation. So, in essence, what I consider premature ejaculation, I'm sure there's a scientific definition that has something to do with like, oh, the person doesn't last, X number of minutes. I'm not going to even talk about that. Premature ejaculation, as I perceive it, is a personal issue in the sense of there's no particular way to define it other than you're not lasting as long as you would like or your partner would like, let's say. And I tend to think that the goal, at least for two partners making love, is that both partners experience orgasm. And again, that's if orgasm is your goal. So, premature ejaculation, the way I look at it is that the individual is overheated. Okay, so you have to think about consumption. What is it that we consume? Okay, so we consume, thoughts, ideas, ideologies. We consume food. We consume practices. So again, you have to think about everything as digestion. So anything you are bringing into your mind, into your physical body, is either going to have a heating effect or a cooling effect, for the most part. Meditation has a neutralizing effect, right? So it's in meditation that we find objectivity, that we can see the heat and the cold. So meditation is always kind of, in a lot of ways, the goal because it offers neutrality. So all that being said, hopefully that wasn't too complex or esoteric. But the idea is that you want to bring in things into your body if you're going to have sex, which are cooling. So let's give a good example. Generally eating before sex is not a good idea. It can make one's awareness sluggish. And so when there's a sluggish awareness, or if, let's say the individual is tired, the likelihood of the person losing control is much higher. So the individual needs to be focused and centered. And this is why I always recommend men, before they make love, to do some breath work, do a little meditation, do some mantra, do something to center yourself first, to make sure that your energies are aligned and alert. Because if they're aligned and alert, you're going to have more control. And, the best way to think about this is that, think about if you're reading something, even, like a book or whatever it is, if you're centered and alert, you're going to take in more information. It's going to be more clear to you. If you're not, let's say, centered and alert, it can be kind of like you're just staring at a page and there's words, right? But you're really not absorbing. There's nothing being understood. So, and again, that's my own experience, so I'm projecting a little bit. But now the other thing is, we'll say, that's first recommendation is don't eat before sex. Don't eat. You'll have not more fires, but more energy for the actual sexual experience that way. So 2 is during the act itself, breathing. So breathing is really important. So there's cooling breaths, right? So as I perceive premature ejaculation is that we become overheated. So in the third recommendation I'm going to give you is really going to emphasize this. But so what is cooling? What is cooling is what moves energy. So what dislodges energy in a lot of ways. So as I'm going to define this is that we'll say the heat, which causes the waters to boil in discharge. In other words, overheating causes ejaculation, right? So one of the things that we have to be very aware of is when we become overly aroused or overheated. So one of the things you can do is a quick centering practice during the actual sexual experience, like let's say breathing through the teeth. I've done this many, many times, or through pursed lips. So inhale through the mouth, exhale out the mouth. Do that a couple times. You feel like you're getting overheated. Keep in mind, a scale of 1 to 10. 10 is ejaculation. You're done. 1 is there's nothing going on. So you have to kind of think about, I'm getting close to an 8. Let me do a breath. And of course, you have to slow your motion at that point, right? So you got to slow your hips, slow your roll. take that deep breath, do a couple breaths, breathing through the teeth, just breathing through the gaps in the teeth. You can feel like the air hit your saliva. It's cooling, right? So, so anyway, that is one of the, two of the breaths that you can do. The other way to kind of think about this is that there's a kind of an insult that someone can use when they call someone else a mouth breather. It's an insult. And that insult is basically the statement is that you're dull, right? The person has a dull intellect. They're stupid. They're a mouth breather. But the reality is that breathing through the mouth actually does cool the intellect, which in the case of a sexual experience, when you're indulged in the act itself, is a good thing, right? Because those of us who tend to be what I consider high heat or high tension individuals, we have to kind of slow it down. We have to cool it. So, and that's the function of the breathing. Number 3, the thoughts you are consuming. This is something that is both acute, meaning in the moment, and chronic over time. So we'll cover the chronic over time first. Fantasy, any sort of pornography you're indulging in, or fantasy, or whatever it is that you're off in your head, what it will do is it'll accumulate heat. Because what it is that the mind starts to think about something sexual, causes the arousal in the sexual organs, and when there's arousal in the sexual organs, heat begins to build. So what ends up happening is, particularly if there's frequent masturbation involved, where you're constantly adding a peak experience, so the orgasm being the peak experience, so some fantasy, some pornography, some act, some kink, whatever it is, I'm not here to judge any of that, but I will judge is, I'm encouraging you to judge and discern are the fantasies, the pornography, your masturbation practice, the repetition, the constant, essentially accessing a peak state of arousal, wrapping it around that fantasy, what it does is it overheats a thought. It overheats some content of your imagination. So if you're in a sexual act in which either the act is mimicking that fantasy, let's say you're exploring a fantasy, the likelihood of you lasting for a long time during that fantasy is quite low, because you've essentially accessed this heated, intense peak experience, peak fantasy, then added an orgasm, which is peak energy, to it. So you've created this like very intense, powerful, reinforced structure, and it's like a surging fire, right? So this very hot, heated fire. So that is the chronic, right? So you've built something up in your mind so intensely that if that thought enters your mind or the act actually occurs, you're going to discharge very quickly. So let's say you're making love to whoever, and the thought enters the mind while you're making love. What happens? You're going to boil out the semen. It's going to discharge because it is such an ingrained pattern. It's so overheated in your mind. It's so taken on proportions that are just like bigger than reality, right? So fantasy is better than the reality. It's because fantasy can be so vivid, so rich, so intense for certain individuals, and it causes, and again, the mind-body interaction is something. If the mind is fixed on something, it's going to manifest within the body, even if it's not actually happening in reality. The sort of the way the nervous system functions is it doesn't necessarily discern between something actually happening and the fantasy of something, right? It's very powerful. Now, acutely, in the moment, again, is that idea that something floods into your mind and it overheats you. You become too hot, right? And then it boils out the semen. Now, one of the issues that people have with fantasies is to become very identified with these fantasies because they are so hot. They are so heated. They create such a high. So that's an issue. So if you tend to discharge too quickly during sex, you have to watch out for where your mind is. What are you thinking about? What are you fantasizing about? Where are you letting your mind wander? Stay present with the person you are with. Look at them in their eyes, you know? So those are some of my recommendations. Hopefully, you know, those recommendations work. But in summary, think cooling food or no food. Think, well, you also have to watch out for stimulants. That's something else I wanted to mention was anything that's going to be a stimulant, something that gets your adrenal glands going. Once again, it's going to add heat. It's going to boil the water and going to cause a discharge. So keep in mind, no food before sex or, you know, just something cooling. Secondly is, you know, watch the, well, do cooling breaths, you know, so know where your edge is, know your limits, know how to cool yourself down. Again, keep in mind the mouth breather comment I made. Thirdly is when you're consuming your thoughts, particularly during the act itself, be very aware and conscious of what it is you're thinking about, because it will overheat and cause the discharge. Now, this is what I do for a living. Okay, so I read people's astrology charts, and I also help men essentially master their sexual energy. So I've created a sexual sovereignty, a male sexual sovereignty program. My website is posted down below the video if you're interested in learning how to progress through that program. It's a 6-week program. I have it set up in various ways, so it's more affordable or not so affordable, depending on how you perceive it. So the reality is that you're going to work through a 6-week period, and it's a powerful 6-week period in which you are essentially pushing the reset button on your sexual energy. So if you are overwhelmed or feel like a slave to your sexual energy, this is a very important thing to consider, whether it's me or someone else who's offering you the opportunity to have some sort of coaching or guidance for a 40-day period of time or a 6-week period. And the reason for 40 days has to do, that's the amount of time it takes the nervous system to adapt and to take on a new pattern. All right. Thank you all for watching. Appreciate you.